Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, April 15th, 2015, the real April Fool's Day. Also the anniversary of Lincoln's death 150 years ago today, and the sinking of the Titanic 97 years ago. A lot of stuff piling up on this day here. And, of course, this weekend will be Patriots Day, and we're going to be talking about a lot of those significant incidents on tomorrow and Friday's show. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is sitting in our control room, as usual, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in. And we're going to start off with a phone call right now. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha, welcome back to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike. Yeah, Mike, I listened to the commercials before you started, and they say China's, economy is, not in free fall, but, it's slowed down because of their exports. I'm like, well, how can our economy be growing according to the federal government?
Well, first of all, the reason China's economy is in trouble is most of their exports were coming to the United States of America. They were manufacturing, we were buying on credit, but now that has dried up. And we already know that these numbers about whether or not we're in a recession get rigged. And 3 or 4 months down the road, there'll be a revision, and they'll revise the numbers downward again. And they're just desperate to keep everybody in the country thinking the economy's okay. We're in a recovery. You may not see it where you are, but that's your own fault. We, the government, and Wall Street are doing all that we can to get this economy going, and our numbers say that we're really successful here. Yesterday we were talking about how the IMF is saying the global outlook is good, even though the poorer countries are still getting poorer.
Well, look at Walmart. They asked the suppliers if they can, reduce prices. Right there, that tells you, like, if Walmart's in trouble and they're closing the 5 stores, and remember, Walmart's their whole system is based on EBT cards from the government. I mean, for low prices, so I mean, I think we're heading into a global depression. I mean, we're in a recession right now, but I mean, there's just no, I mean, you can see where we're headed, with all this daily.
Oh yeah, they're absolutely, the writing is on the wall. Everybody's backed themselves into these corners that they cannot get out of. And we're just waiting for when the crash is actually going to happen. And right now, the agenda of all of these politicians and CEOs and bankers seems to be just to hold off the crash until they retire out of office and their successor gets to take the blame. But they've been doing that for 100 years now, and they've run out of little magic tricks they can do to keep the economy going. This is the downside of economic globalism. When it goes down, it all goes down together. And it's funny that today's the anniversary of the Titanic, because international borders were supposed to serve the same purpose for planet Earth that the watertight bulkheads should have done in Titanic had they not sideswiped the iceberg and opened up 6 compartments here. It's to contain a problem. And once you take those barriers down and the economy goes global, it becomes one interlocked system where we're expecting Greece is definitely going to default on their next payment, and that's going to trigger a derivatives firestorm. That's going to leap the Atlantic to Wall Street, and nobody has been putting up barriers to try and contain the problem, because they're all making too much money by moving the money around the world at light speed and hoping that it's going to somehow magically grow in value.
Hey, what do you think of the ruble up 22%?
Well, that's good for the people in Russia. Their credit rating is going up. It's certainly good for people who are importing into Russia. It is going to put limits on Russia's exports. You remember, in a currency war, the idea is to get your currency worth the least, not the most, in order to sell your exports more easily around the world. It's kind of inverse to what common sense would say, where we want to have a valuable currency so when we go vacationing in Mexico, we can buy 20 sombreros for the price of one sombrero here in the U.S., and certainly tourism works that way. But for exporters, for selling your products and agricultural produce to other countries, you actually want your currency to be lower in value. So it's part good news, part bad news, but what it does tell us is all of these sanctions against Russia, the oil price war, have backfired horribly. In Washington, D.C., I guess they just sit around these little cocktail parties and saying, what if we try this? Well, that sounds good. Let's go for it. And they don't seem to really think these things all the way through to what are the possible ramifications. What's best case, what's worst case, and then we build a middle case out of those so that we have some idea of where we're going with all this.
I see Janet yelling at the edge of the Titanic going down with their life vest not on her.
Well, no, he's standing on the stern, and he's saying, well, my feet are still dry, so we're okay.
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Yeah, the economy is doing, the economy is doing fine. Just don't let the passengers look at the bow, which is under the water. And again, it all goes back to allowing a privately owned central bank to issue all of the public currency as a loan at interest, a system which by design produces more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt strangles the system itself. It's happening here in the United States of America. It's happening all across Europe. It's happening in every single country with one of these private central banks. And the problem is the bankers can always find politicians they can buy to impose their system. And 100 years ago, the federal government of the United States of America, the Congress and the President, sold the American people back into the same system of banker slavery we fought a revolution to break free of. And they all got lots of money for it. And they knew it wasn't going to fall apart until they were dead and gone after their lives of wealth, power, and privilege. They didn't care. They wanted their goodies now. And that's somebody else's problem to deal with the crash. Well, the crash is here. And it's our problem to deal with. And I don't see any way to avoid it. I mean, they're going to go on changing the rules. They're going to go on lying about the numbers. They're going to go on creating money instantly out of thin air until finally somebody panics and says, look, this dollar isn't worth anything any longer. Now then, getting on to the international news. We'll talk more about the economy a little bit later in the program. We're seeing these stories about how Obama blinks on the Iran nuclear vote, and yes, he did. How Obama did a 180 on this bill to allow Congress to vote on the Iran nuclear deal and impose a 56-day delay before the lifting of sanctions for Congress to have their say. Now, Congress probably presented Obama with a veto-proof majority. So Obama really had the choice of going along with the deal or vetoing the bill and then have the black mark of a congressional override of his veto on his presidential resume. Not that he's going to be looking for much work after he leaves the White House. As Harry Truman used to say, it's heck finding a job after you've been president. And I personally wish Obama had stood his ground a little more firmly because Congress is in the wrong on this, legally, morally, and ethically. Now, what's really interesting is over in Russia today, they have a headline about Israel is cheering as Obama retreats before Congress on the Iran deal. And here's the money quote. Benjamin Netanyahu, quote, "We are certainly happy this morning. This is an achievement for Israeli policy." End quote. He's rubbing your nose in the fact that Congress is following Israel's policies, not those of the United States of America. And I want to remind you about a quote that came out in 2001 from former Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. It was reported on Kol Yisrael radio. Every time we do something, you tell me America will do this and will do that. I want to tell you something very clear. Don't worry about American pressure on Israel. We, the Jewish people, control America, and the Americans know it. End quote. And now that reality is on full display to everybody. And I hope you will all remember this next year when you go to those voting polls. And get these friends of Israel out of our government, because right now we need leadership that's going to put America first, second, and third. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm looking in our What Really Happened chat room and also on the email. I'm seeing all these horror stories coming in about people getting hit with all these fines because their insurance isn't Obamacare compliant. And you have to wonder what kind of brain-dead thinking or lack thereof is going on in Washington, D.C., where you have an economy that prevents people from being able to afford health insurance, and then you order them to pay for more expensive health insurance and then fine them when they can't. That's the kind of thinking that we are getting out of Washington, D.C. Alrighty, so getting on back to the situation with Congress and the Iran deal. Story that we're looking at over in Mondo Weiss. Marco Rubio and AIPAC allied in effort to insert poison pill into the Iran deal. Now, he's out there declaring that he's running for president, and he's out there already saying that Iran must recognize Israel's right to exist as a condition of any nuclear agreement with Tehran. Tehran is saying that was never what this agreement was about. It was about the nuclear technology. Obama agrees exactly the same. Mark Rubio is out there pushing Netanyahu's agenda. Netanyahu. And remember, Israel's not even part of the P5+1. Israel's barging in where it is not welcome and not wanted and saying, no, you will do the deal the way I say, and Iran must recognize Israel's right to exist, which, by the way, Iran has already said they will. 1 second after Israel recognizes Palestine's right to exist. But Netanyahu wants it his way, and Marco Rubio's already, obviously, he's another Israeli gluteus gentleman. I have to be careful how I say these things so the FCC doesn't yank our radio license. Now, I want to remind Marco and all of his supporters and fans, Iran's deal is not with the United States government. It is with the international community at the United Nations. Congress has no legal authority over the international community or the United Nations, which organized the P5+1. And it's odd. Congress is willing to allow the president to start wars and murder people on his own whims, but all of a sudden they're demanding oversight on the possibility that peace might break out. With its clear Israel-ordered agenda of killing the deal any way possible and opening the door for yet another war for you to pay for and your children to die in. Now, if the rest of the P5+1 agree to the deal, which seems likely, and the U.S. Congress being the lone holdout and trying to exercise the UN Security Council veto, the world will see the United States as being the rogue nation, not complying with international obligations and treaty requirements, and acting once again as Israel's slave state to fight and start Israel's wars. Now, amazingly enough, the corporate media is starting to take a critical tone with this. The New York Times, no less, called this a reckless act in the Senate on Iran and describes it as Congress muscling in their way into President Obama's negotiations. And remember, under the Constitution, foreign policy belongs to the White House and the State Department. Congress is supposed to deal only with domestic issues. The only time they can set foreign policy is to declare war or not. But the New York Times is out there criticizing the Congress for opening up this rift with the executive branch. CIA Director John Brennan gave a speech in which he said this deal is the best course for peace, and criticism of this deal is disingenuous. The people who are trying to kill this bill are trying to kill it for one purpose only, to start yet another war. Remember, General Wesley Clark in 2003 blew the whistle on the neocon plan to conquer all of the oil-rich Middle Eastern nations, ending with Iran. It's a war of aggression, and that is the ultimate international war crime. All right, we're going to start taking phone calls here. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I'm looking at the situation with the Congress, and I think the Congress pushing its nose into the foreign treaties and foreign policy of the U.S. is certainly going to do one thing, and that is drive a huge wedge between the other 5 nations of this P5+1. And that's most of Europe.
Yes.
And we're not very happy in Europe with America as it is, with all your spying and what have you all over the place.
Well, Europe has suffered tremendously economically with all these sanctions going on against Russia, and that coalition is starting to fall apart. You've got countries like Germany saying, we can't afford to go along with this, stink face issue from the U.S. and Russia. We've got to do business. We've got to have commerce to power our country's economy.
Well, I'm looking at a lot of the blogs on the internet and in the printed press in the UK and Europe, and actually, what appears to be happening, not only is Putin the man of the year in Time magazine,
in the reader poll, the Time magazine hasn't made him man of the year, but he did win the reader poll, which doesn't mean he's guaranteed that cover. And I'm sure the White House is already on the phone to the editors of Time saying, "Don't you dare do that."
Well, I mean, it seems strange that actually the majority of the people voting were Americans. But
yeah.
Anyway, that's another story.
Well, basically what's going on here is it should be sending a major signal to the U.S. government, to the White House and Congress, that their propaganda campaign to bash Putin has completely and utterly failed. We, the American people, are not listening to the U.S. government. We don't trust the U.S. government. We don't believe a single thing they say. We are sick and tired of being lied to about all of these issues, and that's why the readers voted Putin in. And already some of the government trolls are out there saying, "Oh, somebody hacked Time's website. That's the only way Putin could have been voted in. The Russian hackers got in there and stole the thing for him." They absolutely cannot admit the degree to which they have lost the trust and faith of the American people.
Well, I mean, the Obama administration, in the form of Mr. Obama himself and John Forbes Cohen, or Mr. Kerry, if you like, compared with Sergei Lavrov and Vladimir Putin, there's just simply no match. They're just outclassed, completely outclassed.
They absolutely are. I mean, the Russian diplomats are long-term, very experienced diplomats. Putin's been involved in international politics all the way back to when he was with the KGB. The United States elections are basically voting for whoever looks best in the suit, and all of our candidates are pre-screened by the financial interests and Wall Street and Israel, and that's why we're in the mess that we're in. There are no candidates running next year that I would care to vote for, but I do oppose some of them more than others. John, got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be back with another phone call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Two quick bits of news, and then we're going to hit the phones again here. Over in Russia, they are very concerned over Canada's decision to send troops to Ukraine as advisors and trainers. And they're calling Canada's move counterproductive and deplorable. As well they should. And the real irony is at the same time, the top NATO general is demanding Russia stop fueling the conflict in Ukraine. How is, and it's accompanied with, "We know the Russians are massing on their side of the border." How many times have you heard that already? Look at who is pouring weapons and military people into Ukraine. Look at who overthrew the legitimate government of Ukraine a little over a year ago. This is not Russia. And they're out there just hoping that if they scream it's all Russia's fault often enough and loud enough that you will start believing them, those days are gone. That kind of blind naivete on the part of the American people ended in the 1970s. And it's not coming back. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Peter in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. I just want to make a couple of points here about Congress and our government and so on. And I want to start out by saying that Congress, as you pointed out, their only role in foreign policy is to declare or not declare war, the purse strings, and the Senate ratifies treaties. The Senate, not the House.
Yes.
And that's their only constitutional authority. And Congress in recent years has just bent over and greased themselves for the American president, the executive department, the imperial president, to do whatever he wants. Congress has not weighed in on matters of war and peace with their lawful constitutional war powers that are granted in the Constitution. The president goes willy-nilly to war whenever he wants, and Congress lays supine. The Congress laid supine as we went into the Patriot Act. and that eviscerated the Constitution. Warrantless wiretapping. They laid supine when Obama passed the NDAA that said that he can imprison any American for any time, anywhere, for as long as he wants, indefinitely, without any kind of justification or without even charging him with a crime. They laid supine and did nothing when the president declared that he can murder American citizens anywhere in the world and not have to explain to anybody. Yet now, with Israel, they are exceeding their constitutional and legal. The Logan Act is a law. The Constitution, of course, is even higher. They're exceeding that. They've come all at once. The Congress comes alive, and they're doing it for Israel. And they're willing to oppose the president now. But for us, for our human rights, for our Bill of Rights, we get nothing. And when you look at it, when you're talking about Poroshenko, Jewish, installed by Victoria Nuland in the State Department, Jewish, and the neocons, when they talk about Egypt, who now has somebody we put in who's pro-Israel, when they talk about us trying to overthrow Syria and Assad for Israel, when we went into Iraq, now third time, for Israel, all this stuff for Israel, what are they doing for us? When are they standing up for us? Four out of 9 of the Supreme Court, Jewish. Every single newspaper and newsroom on TV and all the motion picture studios, they're all run by Jewish people who are pro-Zionists. They're completely in control, and they'll rise up. You know, they can murder us. The president declares right to murder us, but Congress says nothing. But God forbid he should do something lawful and actually sensible for American policy, and negotiate something with Iran. But you can't go against the ironclad control that Israel and her fifth columnists have in the United States.
Well, you're absolutely right, and we've been saying this for a lot of years. The good news now, though, is because of this sordid display in the Congress, the American people who were deterred from looking at Israel's subversion of our government because they didn't want to be called anti-Semitic or Jew-hater or anything like that, they're now looking and saying, boy, there really is a there, after all, that all these people talking about how our government has been subverted by Israel, there's something to that, and we need to take a look. And I'm hoping that 2016's elections will be the election where Friend of Israel is a vote loser, big time. And we're seeing all these candidates come on out, and the first thing they say is, I'm a friend of Israel. I'm the best friend Israel's ever going to have. No, I'm a better friend than you are. And they're, 3 falls out of 5, who's the best friend of Israel? And I'm hoping that Americans are going to look at this and be horrified, and like you say, where are the friends of America in this campaign? Where are the friends of America running for the White House or for the Congress?
Can I interject something really quickly?
Sure.
It's now become, as you pointed out many times, that when somebody's running for president, Chris Christie, anybody, Rubio, Cruz, when they go to Israel, which of course the Jews supply about 50% of all the money for presidential elections. And they don't get that money without going to Israel and getting approved by whoever does the approval over there. But you remember back when Hillary was running for president, she found a long-lost Jewish relative, and she proclaimed herself part Jewish.
Yeah,
John
I remember.
Kerry, who changed his name, his real name is Cohn. He's from Massachusetts, Irish. He changed his name to Kerry, but his real name is Cohn. Then Madeleine Albright, who once she was Secretary of State, she also declared that she was Jewish. All these, you have to do that if you're going to aspire for upper office at all. That's what you have to be. And it is what it is. And this may sound bad, but you know what? That's just exactly what it is.
But the difference is ordinary Americans are now looking at this and seeing what's been going on all this time. And one of the things they're seeing, of course, is how anything connected to Israel is above the rules. AIPAC has never had to register as a foreign policy lobby, even though that's all they do is lobby on behalf of Israel. And so there are no restrictions on their spending. There's no restrictions on the activities they can undertake. They are exempt from the rules that are applied to every other nation's foreign policy lobbies in Washington, D.C.
We're completely controlled, and I know you're optimistic, and you think that the worm is turning on this. And God love you. I love you for this. You're one of the 4 or 5 places in all of the United States that you can go to get the truth on this is you. But I'm not optimistic. And look what's going on now, Mike, and the media, the media that Joe Sixpack, and that's if you can trust our elections anyways.
That's another issue entirely.
Yeah, and that's controlled by them as well.
Yeah, unfortunately it is. It's a pretty ugly lock, but there is a crash coming that's going to basically overturn all of these apple carts, and during the rebuilding is when people are going to look around and say, what brought us to this disaster? And they're going to know who to blame. And they're going to know that they should blame a government that sold the American people out to the interests of Israel and Wall Street and the military-industrial complex and big pharmaceuticals. And there's a lot of anger out there already. Anyway, listen, Peter, I need to let you go. We talked through the segment. I got to take some commercials here, and we'll be back in a few minutes with another phone call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at the Fox News feed here, and Hillary Clinton is continuing her listening tour across Iowa, trying to prove that she's just plain folks to the voters. And I don't know that she's getting a lot of traction. This all looks very staged, managed to me. And a lot of commentators are starting to come out and say, okay, Hillary's running for president. What is she running on other than being a loyal friend and servant of Israel? And it's rather amorphous what it is she plans to do. I mean, she's claiming to want to protect the American people from the 1%, but her biggest donors are the 1%. J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, so forth and so on. All right, we're going to grab a phone call here. Randy in Illinois. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how's it going?
Well, we're hanging.
I hear you. Hey, I had a question about a document location on your website. You, years ago, you posted this historical list of dates of when the Jews were expelled from, like, certain countries in Europe. Where's on your website located?
I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I'll tell you what, during the top of the hour news break, I will repost that to the main page of what really happened. And it's not just Europe. It's basically a listing of all of the expulsions and persecutions over the last 2,000 years. And the reason I put that list together is because every time you get into this social friction going on, oh, it's the other people's fault, it's because they're Christians, it's because they're Muslims, and I put this list together to show that the only common thread throughout all of this tumultuous history is the way the Jewish people treat the community around them. They don't blend in, they don't integrate, they see them basically as a predator looks on prey. And sooner or later, that does create friction. I mean, the Gypsies went through exactly the same thing. They just weren't as successful at it as the Israelis have been, okay?
Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, you got it. We're going to let you go. Get on back to the news. Iran is proposing a peace plan for Yemen, saying that airstrikes are not the answer. And Iran is going to be submitting a plan today to the United Nations on how to tone this down. Basically, the first thing is a ceasefire on the ground and an end to the airstrikes, which are killing everybody. Children, Houthis, military forces loyal to the former President Saleh, which is the real agenda. The U.S. took out Saleh, put in another puppet. The people of the country don't want the puppet, are trying to kick him out, and the U.S., using Saudi Arabia as their proxy, is having to go back into Yemen for a second time and slap those Yemeni people around and say, you will accept U.S. puppet rule. So Iran is going up to the UN to try and put a peace proposal, and we already know what the U.S. is going to do at the UN Security Council. Veto, 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 veto. We want our war in Yemen. We worked for it. We deserve it. Nobody will deny us. That's the attitude coming out over there. All righty, let's see. China is going to build 2 new nuclear power plants for Iran. So they're growing their nuclear infrastructure, and the Russians have a deal to construct 2 new nuclear power plants. The Chinese are coming in as well. So they're basically turning Iran into a nuclear-powered country, which means they can sell their oil to other countries and not burn it up themselves for electricity. And I'm sure Israel's going to get very, very nervous at the number of targets they're going to have to go after to send Iran back to being less competitive against Israel in the field of nuclear products here. All right, we're going to grab ourselves another phone call. Steve in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk to you about gold.
Yes.
And I see that China is amassing tons of gold.
Yes.
And my question to you is, did China get the gold from the U.S. and London? And if so, is it because China holds our debt?
Nobody knows exactly where the gold is going. Part of the problem being, of course, that it's fungible, meaning you can melt it down and recast it and basically eliminate any trace of where it came from. We know that over in Libya, the gold that was supposed to back the gold dinar vanished following that U.S. invasion. Nobody knows where it went. We know the Bureau of Land Management is starting to try and seize some very rich gold mines up in Oregon. They're really desperate over there. We do know that a lot more gold has been traded on the world market than can be accounted for by the output of all the planet's gold mines. And so it does seem that the reason the New York Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, the Bank of France are in serious trouble regarding their gold depositors is that they have been leasing out and loaning or outright selling some of the gold to keep physical gold prices down, and now they can't get it back. Did China get the gold from the New York Federal Reserve directly? Maybe, maybe not. We don't really know. I don't see the New York Fed just handing the gold over because China holds so much of our debt. I think that they're stalling China on that debt like they're stalling everybody else. But there is no question that the output of global mines for gold cannot account for the volume of physical gold traffic. And so it's pretty much at this point indisputable that all those nations and individuals and foreign banks who have gold on deposit at the New York Federal Reserve, it might not be there. I mean, look what happened when Germany wanted to repatriate their gold. And they got back a tiny fraction of it, which is not even 99% pure. It's 95% pure. It was recast. It wasn't the original bars of gold that Germany put there on deposit. And you need to understand, the gold depository is not like a bank where everybody puts in and you get out and so forth. It's a safety deposit box. Germany pays a fee to the New York Federal Reserve to keep their gold stored there, protected and safe. And the New York Federal Reserve did not actually have any legal right or authority to go into these various rooms for Germany or any other country and just help themselves to a few bars and lease them out the back door and say, well, we'll just replace it later. But the reason China and Russia are both building up their gold stocks is because it's expected at some point they will at least partially back their currencies, the ruble, the yuan, the renminbi, with gold, and that will be an absolute hammer blow to the U.S. dollar, which is only backed with the future slave labor of the American people. And there aren't enough of us there to make good on all those treasury bonds.
Now I got another question, too. Now,
Okay.
do you think the U.S. has any gold at all?
They have
Very
some.
little?
They have some. They just don't have as much as they're supposed to have.
Because I'm just trying to figure out their plan. If all the countries are getting away from the fiat dollar, and the U.S. crashes the system and goes with a new money system, it's not going to be backed by gold either, and people are still not going to have faith in their new system if they do crash it and go to the new system.
Well, I don't think a new currency should be backed with gold, maybe with silver. The problem with gold is it is in such short supply that it can be manipulated, it can be monopolized, and to the profit of the bankers. Silver, maybe even copper. We need a commodity that's in enough abundant supply to provide currency to every person in the country or ultimately the planet. That's why I actually favor a currency based on a kilowatt hour of electricity, because obviously as the population grows, the power generation capacity grows to keep pace with it, so you can't see any hoarding going on. And some other commodity like that. It's universally recognized. Everybody will accept it. And I think that's a good way to base a value-based currency on. We could even do what Germany did when they kicked out the private central bank imposed on them by the Treaty of Versailles. Their new currency was based on an hour of physical labor, and it worked. Even though different labor pays differently, it still worked. It was a currency, value-based, based on a commodity everybody understood and could accept, and that's really what triggered the German miracle, which in turn triggered World War II to crush down this upstart who thought they could run a country without a private central bank.
Well, I'm sure they have a plan. We'll have to see.
Yeah, it's going to be a mess here, but at this point, after all these years of fraud and lying about the numbers, the U.S. dollar it's a hollow shell. There's nothing backing it up, except the true faith and credit of the U.S. government, which right now isn't worth a whole heck of a lot because they have issued more of those treasury bonds than we have Americans' taxes to redeem them. And that is another reason why all that tax money you're paying into the government, very little of it comes back to take care of the American people and the American nation. It's all going out to cover all these financial transgressions and interest payments and all the rest of it. All right,
and it shows, too.
Yeah, it does. We'll be talking about that a little bit later in the economic news as well. Steve, got to let you go here. We're going to take our break for the top of the hour news. I'm going to look for that article the gentleman referenced, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Getting on back to the news here. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu is screaming and throwing tantrums over Russia's decision to move forward with the ongoing sale of S-300 air defense missiles to Iran. Now, this deal was actually concluded a long time ago, back before the U.S. started annoying Russia, and Russia put the deal on hold under U.S. pressure. Well, obviously, that kind of camaraderie is now gone, and Russia's moving ahead with the sale, and even better for Iran, because Russia no longer manufactures the S-300. They're going to get the newer, more capable S-400 at the same price. It's a really good deal. Netanyahu is screaming that this is going to make Iran more aggressive. More aggressive than what? Iran hasn't launched a war of aggression against another country in over 200 years, and it's an air defense system. These are not offensive weapons. What it does is make it more difficult, in fact, possibly impossible, for Israel to just go on in and bomb Iran's civilian power nuclear power station the way they did Iraq all those years ago. Now, Israel's Defense Minister Moshe Yaalon is out there screaming Iran is going to give these S-300 missiles to terrorists. They're going to give them to Yemen and Lebanon and Gaza. How? By stuffing them down their shorts? Do you know how big these things are? Now, is not it a universal right for any nation to defend itself against aggression? Obviously. Certainly, if anybody needs defensive systems right now, it's Gaza. Seems like every year and a half, Israel will say, oh, they attacked us with bottle rockets, and they'll launch another one of these attacks into Gaza. Israel's always the aggressor. Into Lebanon, into Syria, into Egypt. Oh, they made us do what they were going to do bad. We had to attack first. They're terrorists. They're Jew haters. Constantly. These other nations need defensive systems. I agree. Let us not allow proliferation of offensive weapons in the Middle East, especially to Israel. But I think there should be an open-door policy for defensive systems to tone everything down. If Yemen had the S-300, Saudi Arabia would be minding its own business right now. If Lebanon had the air defense missiles, the S-300, Israel would hesitate before trying to start another war with them. Same thing with Gaza. Defensive weapons are a good idea all across the Middle East, but Israel wants the ability to attack other countries with impunity, to exert their imperial will across the globe. Meanwhile, Obama is continuing to show his ire over Netanyahu's tinkering with the U.S. Congress, going back to that speech before the joint session, which started this whole White House congressional rift. And the executive branch is sending clear signals that Israel should not count on U.S. vetoes of UN Security Council resolutions regarding Israel from this point forward. Which is okay. I'm sure Israel's got their fangs into some other member of the Security Council to do their dirty work for them. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Glenn in Pennsylvania, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. About the Russian-Iranian missile deal, do you by any chance remember, I don't have any documentation that haven't dug it up, a story from a couple years ago, I think now, about some Iranian port warehouse being blown to Kingdom Come, and people speculated that the Russians had indeed transferred the S-300 missiles to Iran, but that somehow they had magically managed to blow up or something like that. Do you recall anything like that? I
remember reading something about that, and we know that when one country sells weapons to any country that is on Israel's special high-interest targets list, bad things tend to happen during the shipping process, and that's just something that is an aspect of Israel, has been all along. One of the worst stories I ever heard was not about weapons, but the Palestinians had put together a traveling exhibit of Palestinian embroidery. It's one of the icons of their culture, and it's amazingly beautiful work, and they set up this touring exhibition to go around the world. And when it got to the United States, it simply vanished out of the Los Angeles International Airport. Because Israel doesn't want you remembering there actually is a Palestinian civilization and culture and history.
Right, that's the standard line that it doesn't exist, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, which is complete utter nonsense.
The other thing I wanted to bring up was we now hear Russia finally making very genteel and carefully worded protests about the blatant hypocrisy of America. You know, they couch their words very carefully, but they point out, hey, you know, this isn't cricket. But well, I'm wondering, you've been making the argument on behalf of Iran for years now about them being signatories of the NPT and all that sort of stuff and allowing IAEA inspections. And I'm wondering, why don't these nations stand up and make those same arguments in the mass media for themselves? I mean, you know, we never hear. I mean, why aren't they screaming bloody murder about this? How come you have to, other people halfway around the world have to do it for them? Couldn't they all, you know, I would think that they could say, wait a minute, this is blatant hypocrisy. Look at the history of the MONA. Look at the history of the Israeli weapons program. We are NPT signatures. We are allowing inspections. You know, but they don't seem to ever mount that for themselves.
Well, you're basically looking at English-centric media, which is the United States, Canada, and Europe. And I hate to be the one to break this to you, but the United States is not the only nation Israel has subverted over the last several decades. You know, and certainly they're in control of the media in these other countries. If you go to media in other countries and you use Google Translate, you will find that certainly the other countries in the Middle East and in Africa, and certainly China and Russia are out there saying, yes, this is utter hypocrisy to be screaming about Iran's non-existent nuclear weapons and threatening sanctions and war, while Israel has nuclear weapons, has had them since the 1970s, tried to sell one to South Africa, may have sold one to North Korea, has hydrogen bombs that can level an entire city. And it is complete hypocrisy, and it just underscores the fact that the U.S. federal government is a puppet for the nation of Israel. And we don't like it any more than the people of Yemen or Iraq or Libya like it.
Well, even Al Jazeera is controlled by Qatar, I understand that, but do you think even through the web or certain other agencies, there would be more of a protest? But I understand it would be squelched here. The ironic thing about the thing with Israel is, if Shiite Islam is roughly 20% of Islam, and its strongholds right now are Iran, you know, the Hezbollah in Lebanon and Syria, if they, you know, in their obsession with attacking Iran, cause the balance of power to shift, you know, and the Shiites to be, you know, to lose to the Sunnis, and the Sunnis take over virtually the whole world of Islam, and establish their caliphate, then they're going to turn on Israel. I mean, Israel's benefiting from the Hegelian dialectical tension between the Shiites and the Sunnis.
That's why they keep feeding that. They keep feeding it. But the real risk here right now is Saudi Arabia is all of a sudden starting to pull together all these disparate Arab nations into a single military coalition. And I don't think Israel appreciates how very dangerous that could be, especially with the new king on the throne, who may not be as obliging to Israel as his predecessors were. Anyway, listen, Glenn, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials here. And while we're waiting for the commercial music, for those of you on BAM User, this is a silver coin from Palestine. It's dated 1935. Yes, there has been a Palestine all along. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, turning to Afghanistan, the Russian Security Council chief is pointing out the fact that opium cultivation has grown 40-fold since the U.S. invaded Afghanistan. And you've been hearing all the talk from the U.S. government, oh, yes, we've got to go out there. They're growing opium and heroin over there, and, well, we've got to let them go on growing opium and heroin because they won't have anything else to do, which is nonsense, because while the Taliban was in charge of Afghanistan, opium cultivation had virtually stopped. What were those farmers doing then? Clearly, there is a major credibility gap between what the U.S. government is saying and what is actually happening. And when we posted this to whatreallyhappened.com, we included some of those photos of the opium poppy fields being guarded and protected by U.S. troops and the bags of raw opium being transported by the military. The U.S. government has a long history of profiting in illicit substances. Whether it was heroin brought back from Vietnam, cocaine from Central America during Iran-Contra, the crack epidemic in Los Angeles. A lot of people think CIA stands for Cocaine Importation Agency, and there's definitely a valid reason to say so, because back when Ronald Reagan was president, his Attorney General, William French Smith, wrote the rules that said the CIA was not required to report on drug smuggling activity it witnessed to the DEA so that they wouldn't compromise intelligence operations. Well, the CIA took it one step further and actually got involved in smuggling cocaine to fund covert operations they didn't want Congress to know about, of which Iran-Contra was one of them. And the Afghan opium is flowing, and cheap heroin is on the streets of the United States of America again, and also Russia, which is why they're very upset about it. We're going to grab ourselves another phone call. Rob in Minnesota, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Last night the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis was at our local university, so I got a chance to go out and listen to him. And then they took some questions, and most of the questions had to be put in writing ahead of time, and then they took actual text from the audience, but they wouldn't let anybody have an open mic. But then they had sort of a short reception afterwards, so I got to go up and talk to them. So it was pretty interesting.
Well, did you ask him any pointed questions, and did you get any meaningful answers?
Well, there was one person that talked about all the strange conspiracy theories out there, and I said, yeah, I follow that stuff. And so when I talked to him, I said, yeah, I says, now this is just kind of one of those way out there things, and you can comment on it any way you want, but, we look at taking the new alchemy of fractional reserve banking accelerated by the irrational exuberance of rehypothecation, and take the oversight off by repealing Glass-Steagall, which leads to banksters gone wild who come up with things like collateralized debt obligations and credit default swaps, which leads to a huge bubble in the mortgage market. And they, go ahead and blame that on the deadbeat borrowers, not anything to do with the banking industry having too loose of credit. And all of a sudden you have sovereign credit default swaps, which leads to the pigs, all these, countries in Europe. He just sat there during this whole thing, and really didn't confirm or deny or interrupt. He just sat and kind of looked at me. And then we kind of, talked, a bit more. And
Rob,
and so I said,
pardon me for interrupting you here, okay, but I want to give you a piece of advice, and this is to all the listeners as well. When you're going to be talking about these issues, you need to remember KISS. Keep it simple. And what that means is don't go off on long, convoluted chains, because you're going to see the eyes glaze over and the ears shut down and the brain shut down. When you are able to talk to anybody about what's going on with the Federal Reserve, a much better question to ask is, if the Constitution, well, not even if, it's not an if, it's a real, the Constitution gives the U.S. federal government the authority to create and issue a debt-free currency to fund itself and to power commerce. Why then, for the last 100 years, has the federal government borrowed that currency at interest from a private central bank and enslaving future generations of Americans to that unpayable debt with accumulating interest? And that's a question they don't want to be asked, because it's simple. People get it. The instant you put it out there, they get what you're saying, and it makes sense. Sometimes
respectfully, the guy's eyes didn't glaze over or close up, and there's like 4 or 5 people standing around me, and 1 or 2 were kind of coaching me when I stumble, because I don't get to talk all the time, and so I'm not, sometimes I say ums and ahs, and so there are guys actually kind of coaching me along, and this seemed to be of interest to him, that people actually knew what was going on.
Well, that was a good message to send to him and everything. When you're talking to a banker, an insider, somebody in the Fed, you can go off on those various terms because they know the jargon and the buzzwords.
That string,
Yep.
I did actually get to, because he is the the president of the region that includes North Dakota. I said, well, I'm a student of G. Edward Griffith, Bill Stills. I really like Ellen Brown, and she's very strong on this community banking, and North Dakota that's the only state that's been in the black, and it has nothing to do with the Balkan oil. It has to do with that they have their own community bank. What do you feel about that? And you go, well, I don't have a lot to say in it. And remember it was a while back I called and I said, well, obviously they dropped the price of oil to hurt Putin, but could it also be to kind of bankrupt the Bank of North Dakota, since they've obviously will be spending a lot of money to upgrade the infrastructure to handle the huge glut of people and traffic that come into the state. And if all of a sudden and this was the one time that he kind of goes, well, no, of course we don't have anything to do with that. We deal with lots of independent banks.
I don't think they were targeting North Dakota. That's too small an issue for them to deal with. Where the oil price war has backfired on Wall Street is the generally accepted conventional wisdom was the American people were going to take the money that they were saving, filling up their gas tank, and they were going to start spending it on other things. That hasn't happened. And again, the economy is locking up because there just isn't enough money in circulation to power commerce. The only available source of currency is more loans at interest, and nobody is borrowing right now because they don't know for a fact they'll be able to pay it back. They don't want to borrow anymore because we're all seeing this crash coming. Anyway, Rob, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you know, President Obama is working to normalize relations with Cuba. I think the primary goal there was to prevent Russia from having a foothold in this hemisphere as the rush to war with Russia continues unabated. But still, after all these decades of holding a grudge against the Cuban people, I think it was a good idea. And not just because I'm looking forward to Cuban rum and Cuban cigars here. Now, Cuba is praising the U.S. for taking them off the list of nations that sponsor terror and adding the comment that Cuba should never have been on the list in the first place, which underscores something I have been thinking about for a great many years. The U.S. government has this list of nations that sponsor terror, and yet we're never actually shown an example of why the U.S. knows this nation is sponsoring terror. It's merely an accusation that is used to impose financial harm. Now, as far as I can recall, the only terror incident involving Cuba was Operation Northwoods, which was not run by Cuba. It was a U.S. plan to crash an airliner and blame Cuba for it, to launch yet another invasion, to get rid of Castro and put a U.S. puppet back in control of the island. That's why the U.S. has been so angry with Cuba all these decades, because the U.S. had put in a puppet ruler, Batista. The Cuban people got fed up with it, kicked the U.S. puppet out. And boy, that is just not to be allowed under the U.S. foreign policy. Once you get a U.S. puppet ruler, you stay loyal to that U.S. puppet ruler. And that's what this whole tiff with Cuba has been about ever since. And it's amazing, all these decades later, and we're still seeing all these people say, we can't trust Cuba, we've got to maintain the blockade, we've got to invade, we've got to do this. Okay, you want to invade, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, have fun. But I'm getting really sick of these ancient money junkies setting up all these wars for our young people to be killed and crippled in. I think we've had enough of that. All righty, we're going to grab a phone call here. Rick in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, big fan of your show. It's about my fourth time calling in. Got a quick question. I love everything you do. Quick question regarding the recent post regarding the timeline of Jewish persecutions.
Yes.
And my question is this, is just really, I agree with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
My question is there any other race, ethnicity, nationality, religion that has had similar evictions, if you will, to that list of the Jewish persecutions?
Yeah, there are others. I mean, if you go back through the history of early Christianity, especially, and certainly the ongoing conflict between Christianity and Islam, the Crusades, and all the rest of it, these things happen. But Israel takes pride in it because it's part of their self-image of permanent victim, but it's always other people's fault. And the whole purpose behind that list is to point out, no, actually it isn't. If you go into somebody else's country and you start taking advantage of them and demanding special treatment and just otherwise acting in a very arrogant, we're superior than you because the imaginary playmate says so, sooner or later you're going to rub people the wrong way.
I agree. And you know, on that thing in terms of not necessarily the Jewish persecutions, but Zionism as a whole in the state of Israel, is why isn't it that even, and I know you do ask, but a lot of the alternative media, they never ask the question, you know, when Netanyahu addressed our Congress like our own president and told us what we did for them, nobody asked the question quite often enough is what do they do for us? What is the advantage? Why, in other words, what does Israel do for the United States? Why are they such a great partner when all we do is give and they take?
Well, that's always a question that needs to be asked. I mean, if we accept the official story of World War II and the Holocaust, we, the people of the United States of America, sacrificed blood and treasure to prevent the Nazis from completing whatever it was they were trying to complete. Well, where's the gratitude? Shouldn't Israel be sending us money to compensate the families who lost their primary breadwinner in that war? But no, all we ever hear is, okay, that was last week, what are you doing this week? And this constant greed and grabbing does, in fact, alienate people. And a lot of this tension would go away if Israel would simply look in a mirror at how they themselves treat other people around them. It's like this issue about recognizing Israel's right to exist. All the Arab nations in the region have said, yes, we will do that 1 second after you recognize Palestine's right to exist. But Israel's attitude is, you must recognize our right to exist, you must do what we want first, and then maybe we'll do something nice for you, which never happens. And it is that attitude that really grates on a lot of people.
Is there, you know, so we've identified the problem. Is there anything that the layperson like myself can do other than, you know, trying to boycott? But again, you try to boycott buying condiments and mustard, and you're paying a hidden tax with the kosher tax they have on all the jars, right?
Yes.
So what can we do?
Okay, and before I go forward on that, I do want to point out something that you all need to keep in mind, those of you who are health conscious. Anything certified kosher doesn't have GMO in it. So it may actually be worth paying a little extra money for that. Now, what we can do is we can share the information that we have with other people and simply point out that, you know, the American taxpayer has been forced to give Israel something approaching 20 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program, and we have not gotten any kind of a technological boost from it, an update to Velcro, any of the economic benefits that came out of the space race of the 1960s. We've not seen any of that. The money just goes into Israel, the weapons go into Israel, Israel then turns around and sells our technology to other countries and makes money off of it both ends. The special relationship with Israel appears, as far as I can tell, based entirely on blackmail and corruption of our government. And they're doing it to Canada, they're doing it to France, they're doing it to Britain. And it really is the tentacles of this very dark octopus spreading across the globe.
Very good, Michael. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're going to let you go. All righty, now then, article coming out of Zero Hedge. Russian-Iranian cooperation in the creation of a new regional security system. Now, as we know, Russia and Iran are very good friends. Iran is being driven into the Russian sphere of influence by continuing Israeli-U.S. aggression and threats. They now have a barter agreement underway where Iran is sending their oil to Russia. Russia is sending back goods. They're not going through a currency system of any kind, which means the sanctions don't apply. And obviously, Iran is becoming strategically important to Russia. And that is something that I hope all of these people who are out there singing Bomb Bomb Iran with McCain will take into consideration. Now, turning to the economy, as was mentioned earlier in the show, the ruble has gone up almost 22% against the U.S. dollar so far this year. And that is a very strong currency. There's a good side and there's a bad side. But for most people around the world, it indicates the ruble is a strong, trustworthy, dependable currency compared to the U.S. dollar. China has announced that there are 57 countries will be founding members of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. The U.S. is not one of them. Even Israel got in on the ground floor. Iran, Great Britain, Laos. The only ones who didn't get in were the United States and Taiwan, but only because Taiwan preferred to use the name Republic of China. China's already said, if you call yourselves Taiwan, you're in. The Greek bond yields are soaring. That's a bad sign. There's another payment deadline coming up, and it doesn't look like Greece has got any way to pay this. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. As I mentioned before, we went to the commercial break. The yield on Greek bonds is soaring. That is actually a bad sign because a soaring yield means higher risk. And they're increasing the yield to try and get people to buy the bonds, and they're not really selling, and I don't blame them. Now, we're looking at a situation in Greece where they just succeeded barely making the last payment to the European Central Bank, the IMF, the Troika, and Russia stepped in with a little bit of help to get them to make that payment. Now, to make that payment, they were borrowing from pension funds, savings accounts. They were basically just running around hat in hand, grabbing all the cash they could, giving it to the EU. And there's a bigger payment coming up, 2.1 billion, I think it is, euros. Yeah, 2.1 billion euros. Greece doesn't have it, period, end of discussion. And so they're looking at a default. They're talking about going back to the drachma and leaving the EU, and they're going to get cozy with Russia. Because Russia's trying to help them out, not plunder and loot them the way the money junkies at these private central banks are. And this, of course, could be a major, major upheaval in the global financial system because Wall Street has been selling credit default swaps against Europe's debt, including Greece's debt. And the holders of those credit default swaps, when Greece defaults, they're going to be pounding on the doors of Wall Street saying, pay up. Now, because credit default swaps are unregulated, the Wall Street firms that were selling these things and making lots of money off of them don't have cash reserves to pay the claims. So one option for them is to turn around to the U.S. government and say, we need another taxpayer bailout. And the U.S. government will say, there, Mr. Wall Street executive, we understand. The American people are just generous to a fault. We'll give you another few $1 trillion out of their pocket to clean up this mess you made. Except, of course, we, the American people, don't have it. because we've been plundered and looted by the private central bank. Now, another option that they're talking about is that credit events are decided by a committee that is made up of representatives of those Wall Street firms that sell credit default swaps. And so far, their track record of acknowledging a credit event and triggering payouts on those credit default swaps has not been very good. They're basically voting to say, yes, we sold you the credit default swap, but we don't see a genuine, legitimate credit event that says we have to pay you on that. But that's only going to get you so far, because when you're talking about demands, exposure on the size of an entire nation defaulting, Wall Street is now in a real corner. They can't afford to pay the claims. They'll go out of business. If they simply refuse to recognize Greece's default as triggering the credit default swaps, that in turn will collapse the derivatives market. Because everybody's going to say, what's the point of buying credit default swaps when they are never made good? So one way or the other, there's going to be a major, major upheaval on Wall Street. Standard & Poor's has downgraded Greece yet again for its unsustainable commitments. Well, Greece wasn't making the commitments. The Troika was making them on behalf of Greece. We have decided you will do this. You will have this austerity. You will give us this. And the people of Greece are saying the same thing the people of the United States are. We don't have the money you seem to imagine we have to make good on all of this. So, this is going to accelerate toward the end of this month here. Over in the Moldovan farmers are now barricading roads and demanding compensation from their government for their loss of business to the Russian market. All the people all across Europe got hammered by these sanctions, which Russia has clearly survived. Whoever thought this up didn't think it through all the way to the end for its ramifications. And we're seeing these protests all over. There have been protests in France, protests in Germany. And the anti-Russian coalition the U.S. thinks it has in Europe is falling apart. Because all those leaders of the European nations can stand there and say, oh yes, we stand united against Putin. But their own populations are turning on them. Now here in the United States of America, we have seen how workers' rights and benefits are being whittled away. The pensions have been emptied. They were defunded by the collapse of the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud on Wall Street. Now we're seeing major retailers lobbying the federal government to cut back on workmen's compensation programs. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, workmen's comp is a program where your employer, as part of their employee taxes that they have to pay for the privilege to hire you, goes into a fund where if you are injured on the job, this fund will help cover your medical costs. And we are seeing movements from Walmart, obviously as anti-labor as they get, Macy's, Nordstrom, Lowe's, Kohl's, and Safeway. Their goal is to gut the workman's compensation program, so they're off the hook. If you get injured or killed on the job, it's not going to cost them anything. You're on your own. Hey, you've got Obamacare. We don't have to worry anymore. U.S. industrial production plunges by most since August of 2012. Utility output drops most in 9 years, and that's including the strain on the utilities from this cold winter. Article out of governmentslaves.info. Economic recovery continues, so they say, as more companies shut down and lay off workers. U.S.-based barrel maker Grief Incorporated is ending metal barrel production in 2 U.S. states. Spain-based first casual restaurant Mondatitos chain has placed 100 of its U.S. restaurants into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Bogue's Restaurant, Alabama, Chapter 11. Over in California, the Agoura Hills-based Interthink has sold off its mortgage division, laid off 70 people. There's no real estate boom in California. Like the unemployment numbers, it's a myth. Digital Globe has been forced to lay off 64 people. Tampa, Florida, Ohio Retail Security and Mainstream Maintenance has issued a warn. It will be laying off 49 people by the end of May. There's word coming out of Idaho. Nuclear power plant operator Areva may shut down their Eagle Rock project. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. Story out of Zero Hedge. Staggering student loan defaults on deck. 27% of students who have student loans are a month or more behind on their payments. And what did Wall Street do with the student loans? They bundled them. They bundled them as secured investments. They didn't learn anything from the 2008 meltdown. You know why? They didn't have to pay for it. You did. Now then, a top Federal Reserve official indicated yesterday that the municipal bankruptcies of Detroit, Michigan and Stockton, California are just the tip of the iceberg. There is going to be more of these filings to come because if people don't work, people don't pay taxes. And if there's no tax base, these cities can't pay their debts. Remember what I have been saying all along. Where the federal government has failed was in ignoring that for the rich to take money out of the top of the pyramid, there has to be some way for the money to be recirculated down to the bottom so that workers can trade their labor for wealth to pump back into the bottom of the system. And that aspect of the pyramid has collapsed. It's gone away. It's been offshored. The rich are sucking at the top of the pyramid, and there's less and less in there for them to get. Now, if you heard the SRN news break, the Federal Reserve has announced that our U.S. economy has grown a teensy tiny bit. They'll probably revise that negative a few months down the road, and they're saying it's hit by the hard winter. The reason the economy didn't grow the way we want was that hard winter, which you are all supposed to forget about when Obama starts talking about his carbon tax again. Doug Casey is out there saying we're going to have massive bankruptcies across the board because all the debt is owed to somebody else. It's all linked together. We'll be back after the news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. If I were you, I would not be going out for a hamburger today. There is a one-day walkout underway by fast food workers in 230 cities, including New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, St. Louis, Kansas City, Raleigh, North Carolina. Basically, it's the fast food cooks and the cashiers walking out as part of their campaign to get a living wage from these large fast food corporations. Alrighty, very alarming story out of ThomasDishaw.com. The supply chains for the nation's stores are running so thin right now, trying to save gas, trying to avoid excess inventory that they're going to be taxed on and so forth and so on. Right now, on average, across the United States of America, supermarkets have less than a one-day supply of food on hand. If the supply chain breaks down, the stores will be empty immediately. Something to keep in mind. Let's see, another story out of Refreshing News. In the last 5 years, the 200 most politically active companies in the United States have spent $5.8 billion influencing our government with lobbying and campaign contributions. Those same companies, as a result of that lobbying, got $4.4 trillion in taxpayer support. $750 back for every $1 in. If these companies can afford $5.8 billion in campaign contributions to politicians, they don't need taxpayer support. This is just more fascism on display. When political power and corporate power are aligned together against the general population, you are living in a fascist economic dictatorship. Now, something on the lighter side here, over at the Dutch Central Bank, they just had to let go one of their top officials who's been responsible for regulating the financial services industry in the Netherlands for the last 8 years. It's a 46-year-old woman who, in her off hours, was working as a kinky prostitute and earned 10,000 euros a week. Not exactly the image of bankers. Or maybe it's an indicator of what kind of mentality is drawn to being a banker here. On a more serious note, looking over at Investment Watch blog, it is worth recalling exactly what HSBC was found to be and admitted doing. Laundering hundreds of millions of dollars for the world's biggest crime syndicate, the Sinaloa Narco Cartel, which is getting their weapons courtesy of the U.S. taxpayer through the Fast and Furious program. The drug criminals in our government are supporting the drug criminals in Mexico's government. Now, I referred to this earlier in the show. There was an expectation on Wall Street that if we were paying less money for our gas in our car, that we would take that extra money and we would go on down to the shopping malls and start buying a whole bunch of stuff. Didn't happen. People are trying to basically protect their cash positions in all this uncertainty. But the attitude coming out of Wall Street is the economic problems are all the fault of you American people because you're not spending enough to get the economy going again. The reality is we don't have jobs that allow us to earn enough money to spend it, to boost the economy. Talking about looking in a mirror, some of these Wall Street money junkies have to look into that mirror of reality from Don Quixote and see that they are the cause of the problem. Their greed is a cause of the problem. You cannot run an economy constantly taking money out of it and not creating some way for new wealth to be brought in through the labor of the workers. And between offshoring, driving wages and salaries down, the system is horribly out of balance and it's falling apart. Now then, very tragic story out of Washington State. Young couple and their 8-month-old baby were killed on Monday driving along the highway under an overpass in Washington State. A large concrete barrier broke off the overpass, slammed into their car. The impact was so severe it took several hours to get the bodies out of the wreckage. Obviously, instantaneous death. We can be grateful for that. More neglected infrastructure. And we did a flashback to a story of the exact same thing happening last February in Maryland. Guy was driving underneath the Prince George's County Bridge, or actually it was a lady, and basically fell on the bridge. Now, especially because today is April Fool's Day. Government is the most expensive thing you will ever buy in your life. Certainly be forced to buy. Are you getting value for the money? To judge by these stories, you are not. The roads and bridges are failing. The rail system is in decay. The irrigation system out west is crumbling. All that money that you are paying in is flowing to Wall Street to prop up their little Ponzi scheme. It's pouring into the war machine to commit murder, death, torture all across the globe. The CIA torture dungeons, you're paying for those. The NSA spy shops that are violating your constitutional rights, you're paying for those. And, of course, that continual flood of money to Israel. Now, getting on to politics here. Not to anybody's surprise, analysts have pointed out that more than 2 million of Hillary Clinton's Twitter followers are fake, or people who signed up for accounts and never tweet, meaning they're not actually there. And apparently she's already under fire for having bought fake Facebook fans. There are companies out there that for a fee will go in and like your page and like your posts and run the numbers up. And apparently Hillary got caught using those. She's manufactured fake from top to bottom. Oh, and by the way, under the heading of obvious pathetic hoaxes, the gravestone of Hillary's father in Pennsylvania was found toppled over. They're investigating the vandalism. Actually, it takes 2 guys, put it back up. It's all fixed. This is a pathetic play for sympathy. And we can expect these kinds of hokey sympathy grabs from now through November of next year. Now, as you know, the Drug Enforcement Agency has been hit with a major scandal. Actually, it's a whole series of scandals. The head of the DEA was in front of congressional investigators today explaining why the plethora of civil service protections for government workers makes it impossible for her to fire these DEA agents who were going to orgies being paid for by the very drug lords they're supposed to be investigating. And no, they were not working undercover. Now another scandal has come out where these DEA agents were hiring their own prostitutes for their own daily sex parties in Colombia. Some of them may have been underage. Guess who's paying for all of this? You are. Now, up in Canada, there's been this big news story about this terrorist suspect, Nuttall, who was going to do pressure cooker bombers and suicide and all the rest of it. Turns out to be another manufactured setup by the RCMP. It has basically come out that this RCMP undercover got next to this guy and has been trying to urge him along. You got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. And every time Nuttall tried to back out, they would come in and say, well, let's do this. You know, let's try this instead. They're trying to create the illusion of a terror threat in this country to keep you all scared and obedient. And by the way, message to all those people at the NSA spying on the American people, we're not what's destroying this country. The money junkies are destroying the country. The Israel firster politicians are destroying this country. Why don't you go spy on them for a while? It's got to be much more interesting than peeking into my life. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm sure you've all seen the movie The Interns. It's a story about these two guys who go and be interns at Google, and it's a real feel-good piece. It's a lot of fun. And it certainly shows Google off in a very, very positive light. But Google is starting to show a darker side. They're starting to pick up some bad habits from Microsoft, and they're being called on it. The European Union is getting ready to file an antitrust lawsuit against Google for unfair practices. There have been years of investigation, 3 attempted settlements that went nowhere, and apparently they're going to be announcing this week that there is an antitrust lawsuit by the European Union against Google. Now, there are a couple of overlapping issues. One of them has to do with the fact that Google's search algorithm somehow seems to put Google's affiliates ahead of those of its competitors, rather than based on true popularity. And France is going to demand that Google disclose its search algorithm, which would be interesting to see what is in there and how they judge what is a good website and what is not. Now, there are a couple of overlapping issues here related to the Android operating system. Now, Android started as an open source project where anybody could get the source code, compile it onto tablets, phones, whatever device, and it was open source. But Google sort of took that and they did a value-added situation of pre-writing a whole bunch of apps to bundle with it, which Google then has sold to manufacturers like Samsung. The problem is that the contract under which these operating systems and applications are licensed to the makers of tablets and smartphones is these manufacturers are now obligated to install Google's applications and services and basically block out competing versions. All of this is anti-competition, and that's the reason for the EU complaint. This is not too far removed from when Microsoft was taken to court for always bundling Internet Explorer with their operating system, making the operating system and Internet Explorer so tangled up that you had to leave it there, and trying to basically prevent you from using other browsers. And remember, it was Microsoft that in the early days of HTML, in the first browsers, Microsoft broke the standard and went off and did their own variations, which doubled the work of web developers. Because instead of writing, please embed this here, you had to write code saying, is this Internet Explorer? If so, do this. If it's anything else, do that. And it doubled the cost of web development. HTML5 was supposed to get around that by adopting a whole new standard. Once again, Microsoft is already going off into the ether with, we're going to do things a little differently to prove that we can get away with that. Now, John McAfee, who we had on the show a while back, is out there just screaming what we already know. The government is planting malicious software on your phone so it can see what you're doing. And the point he's making isn't that we're being spied on. He's saying that decades of this installation of backdoor and malware have resulted in a loss of functionality for our devices and a loss of security, because every backdoor created for the government to spy on you is found and used by malicious hackers. And all of this spyware running on your devices is using up CPU cycles. It's using up memory. It's using your property. And the government is not compensating you for that usage of your property. And that's in the bottom of the Fifth Amendment. Most people think Fifth Amendment self-incrimination. Read it all the way through. The government is not allowed to use your personal property for their purposes without compensating you for it. And yet, the government, the NSA, is using your internet connection bandwidth. They're using CPU cycles, hard disk space, memory space, your webcams, all of it. They're using to spy on you without just compensation, which is why I keep on saying that all of this NSA spying, it's not just a violation of the Fourth Amendment, it's a violation of the Fifth Amendment and the Ninth and Tenth Amendments, by the way. Now, a week ago, the United States was claiming that Russian hackers had broken into the unclassified part of the White House network and access the president's schedule, which is there available to see anyway. There's a page on whitehouse.gov. This is what the president is doing today. It looked like a PR stunt. And certainly when the U.S. government came out and said they're absolutely sure it was Russia, even though the attacking IPs were spread across the globe, yeah, it's another let's bash Putin moment. Now the Pentagon is announcing to the Senate they're creating a new cyber surge force trained to defend against America, or to defend America against Russia or Iran or China. In other words, they've gone on another hiring binge for trolls and hackers and other miscreants to make life miserable for those of us trying to just earn a living out here on the internet. Another story out of IntelliHub, one of the globe's biggest publishers of textbooks and other educational materials, is now monitoring the social media accounts of the students the textbooks are given to. See if they're commenting on what's in the textbooks. Privacy has vanished in the United States of America. And we should be angry and outraged because that privacy, that right to privacy, was a gift given to us by the founding fathers of this nation and paid for in the blood of everybody who died in the Revolution or any of these other wars since then, trying to preserve the American way of life. And the American way of life that we grew up with, it's gone. We're a fascist dictatorship. You have no right to privacy, unless you're Hillary's email server, of course, then the rules change completely for you. Major protests going on in New York against police violence. More protests planned against police brutality in Chicago and Southern California. They're still out there trying to claim that this is a racist issue of white police officers murdering black people. But the actual numbers are police forces of all color are 25 times more likely to pull the trigger on a white suspect because of all the negative publicity surrounding shooting of black people. 25 times more likely to shoot a white person here. Down in Louisiana, 2 police officers have been arrested on charges of racketeering for accepting a bribe of over $100,000 to plant drugs on an innocent man and then arrest him. They were paid by the man's brother, who's co-owner in a business that he coveted. The deal has exploded. The guy paying the bribe is now in jail. The man who was wrongfully arrested is now out, in control of the company, and probably planning one heck of a civil lawsuit against the police department. Now, over at RINF.com, coming out of Edmondson, Missouri, leaked documents show that the city management is literally telling the police departments, your future budget And revenues and paychecks depend on you getting out there and writing a bunch of traffic tickets. We don't have a quota system, really, but if you don't write more tickets, we're going to have to cut your budget. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, one of the issues that is tangled up with this whole police brutality is how police can search your car without a warrant if one of them says, ooh, I think I smell marijuana. And the fact that they never find the marijuana is never a factor in judging that the search was illegal. It's just whatever the cop decides to say to justify what he's doing. Further complicating the situation, as you know, there are these portable, in-the-field police drug testing kits. And there has been concern raised that these tests are not very accurate at all, that they can show false positives for legally owned substances, that it confuses. And a lot of people are being arrested and prosecuted and convicted on these field test kits alone without going for more accurate GCMS testing. So somebody wanted to find out how big a problem are these test kits? How inaccurate are they? And it's been declared a secret. You're not supposed to know whether or not these testing kits are accurate or not. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. James in Tokyo. Hi, gozaimasu. What's on your mind?
Hi, gozaimasu, Michael. I want to talk about Greece today.
Okay.
First, I think you're making too much about the Russia connection. I don't believe that they're going to bail out Greece. They may help them with gas lines or stuff like that, but that's not going to happen because Greece is insolvent. But what I do think is going to happen is no matter what happens, it's all going to turn out the same, because if they get more loans from Europe, they're already insolvent and they know they can't pay it. So in that case, there's going to be default anyway. They can't keep getting loans and doing austerity measures. Like in America, you're not going to see them cut out Medicare and Social Security. But if they default...
Well, now, wait a minute. Congress is already considering a bill that will charge seniors more for their Medicare coverage. So they're not cutting it out, but they're transferring the cost back onto the people.
Well, yeah, that they could try and raise it, but what I think what's going to happen is they're going to default. They're going to start printing their own money. Now, all the loans from the ECB and the IMF, about $320 billion, most of that is in British pound sterling. So once they start printing their own money, first of all the Greeks will want to get all their money out of the country. When they do that, there's going to be bank runs in Greece. And when the bank runs, they're going to start, they'll start with all the loans that they owe in British pound sterling. They're going to change that to their own Greek currency. And what that is going to cause is a lot of, difficulties for the Greek people with hyperinflation, but it's going to cause the Greek currency to probably collapse, I believe, to about 10 to 5% of its value. And at that point, even though the ECB and the IMF, they're going to get only their money back in that highly depreciated Greek currency, they're going to be able to buy all the Greek assets at a pittance of any type of value.
Well, they're already able to do that. There's been a garage sale on Greece. Somebody even wanted to buy the Parthenon.
But even now, like what's the bonds to the ECB, they're probably like still 85% of the value. Maybe the IMF are like 65. So it's going to go down to just like 10% or 5%. Then they're really going to be able to buy everything in Greece at a pittance of the value. So the moral of the story is, no matter what happens, Greece is going to get raped no matter how it comes out.
Well, I disagree. I disagree. First of all, nobody's going to loan Greece any more money with their, being rated, sovereign debt is rated junk. Nobody's going to loan them any more money here. And Russia helped Greece with the last payment, but obviously Russia can't step in with an entire 2.1 billion euro equivalent here. I think what's going to happen is Greece is going to launch the drachma, and they're simply going to say, we've defaulted on all the debt, and we're leaving the European Union, and that will be the end of it. And because you know, the Greek government absolutely, the new incoming government absolutely doesn't want to play ball with the European Central Bank and the European Union because of the hard line that these institutions took with the new government of Greece. There's a lot of animosity there. And Russia has rolled out the red carpet. I do see Greece pivoting to the Russian sphere of influence. And, you know, I imagine one thing Greece might do is they're going to come out with the drachma and they will exchange them for euros held by the Greek people. Then they'll just box up all those euros and send them back to the European Union and say, there, you got your money back. Or at least as much of it as we've got.
Well, they're going to pay it back, but they're going to pay it back in the drachma.
No, I don't think they're going to do that.
They're going to have to because
I disagree because the European Union isn't going to accept the drachma. The European Union only accepts euros. So anyway, listen.
They're going to be out of the currency markets, and there's not going to be any choice.
Well, I don't think. I think probably Greece would be best off out of.
That's what they're going to do.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. I think Greece would probably be better off being out of the currency market for the foreseeable future. I'm going to go ahead and take one more phone call before the end of the segment. Shane in Colorado, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello. I want to talk about the Council of National Policy.
Yes.
And how I read an article today in the National Journal how they're picking our next president.
Well, everybody likes to think they're picking the next president. Sheldon Adelson likes to think he's picking the next president. AIPAC likes to think they're picking the next president. What's openly on display is this utter disregard for what we, the American voters, might want.
Exactly. And this is just the right of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is going to pick the left side.
Okay.
So we get, you know, and what controls both sides, the Bilderberg or, you know, whoever, so we get the, right?
Well, I think the lines of authority are shifting and overlapping quite a bit. Basically, these are formalized faction fights within the political structure. The CFR's agenda is to push forward the neocon war policy, and they don't even care who's in the White House. In fact, right now, I would say that the animosity by Israel and the Congress toward Obama is that here in his second term, he's wandering off the reservation. He doesn't need Israel anymore. He doesn't need AIPAC. He's not going to run for office again, and he's starting to basically make up his own mind on some of these issues. And that's why there's all of a sudden this new animosity against Obama. I would not be surprised to see the Congress attempt an impeachment against Obama to get him out of there and get Joe Biden in there. Because right now the Democrats are in a panic. They have basically bet their entire political future on Hillary Clinton, and she's not looking so good. Her poll numbers in the swing states are already going into negative territory. They're sliding downward, and they don't really have another credible Democrat to run. I mean, they even talked about bringing back Al Gore. But if Biden is in the White House as the incumbent, that is a tremendous advantage going into 2016. So I would not rule out an impeachment effort against Obama in the coming months. Okay?
Thank you for your time.
All right, we're going to let you go here. We're coming up on another commercial break here. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about the gun grabbers, and we're going to be talking about human-caused global warming and a bunch of other end-of-the-day topics. We'll be right back. And actually, we've got a few more seconds to go here because I misread the clock. But there's some new Bloomberg propaganda. They're campaigning against Kroger's grocery stores for allowing legal carry inside the store. When was the last time you saw a mass shooting at a Kroger? Something to think about. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And a few weeks back, the BATFE, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, how did they get all the fun stuff in their one agency? Had to back down over a proposed ban on the M855 bullets. These are ammunition for the AR-15 with a little steel tip to them, considered light armor piercing. Well, apparently, the Department of Homeland Security, which has already spent huge amounts of your tax dollars stockpiling ammunition, just placed an order for an additional 62 million rounds of AR-15 ammunition. They're stocking up. Now, a lot of people are very concerned about this summer's Jade Helm 15 exercise. Is it just an exercise? Even if it's just an exercise, it's very alarming to people because clearly the military are training to take control of America's civil areas. A lot of people are out there saying this is going to go live and it's going to be the real deal. Well, the indication against that is Colorado just canceled their participation. They've backed out of it. They're saying, no, Jade Helm 15 will not be taking place in Colorado. And obviously, if the states have a right to opt out of this operation, then it is just a drill. Now, apparently, the U.S. government is going to set up a website where American citizens can finally find out whether they're on the no-fly list without standing at the actual ticket counter to find out, and a summary of why they're on the no-fly list. Still no mechanism for wrongfully listed people to get off the list. And even the Department of Homeland Security and the Justice Department are admitting that most of the people on that list probably shouldn't be there. But once you're on there, you're stuck. You can be on that list just because you annoyed somebody at a boarding gate. And they can just file a report saying, this person's on the no-fly list, and there's no recourse for you to get off that list. Okay. There is a new phone scam making its way over in Great Britain where the scammers call up, say that there's a warrant for your arrest. The bailiffs are about to kick the door down of your business and take you to jail unless you settle the fine now with a credit card. Funny how the British government can be all up in arms about what's going on in Yemen and Syria and stuff. They're not even taking care of their own people. Alrighty, let's see. Kamali Fernando, accused of trying to humiliate people by suggesting mentally ill people wear colored armbands. On the other hand, I would support the idea for politicians, so we can identify the sociopaths from the true psychopaths. Alrighty. Let's do global warming. End up the show with that. Bolder weather, rain and snow today, up to 5 inches of snowfall by Thursday night. This is April 15th, April Fool's Day. Unsettled second half of week to feature snow from Denver. Had a reader sent pictures from Salt Lake City. They're under a blizzard. And I got another email from Owen Sound, Ontario, Canada, which is on a parallel with the northern boundary of California. That city has had to declare a state of emergency disaster area because their water pipes have frozen. This has never happened before in the recorded history of that city. Now, when you are running pipes in the ground, your civic engineers have to determine what is called the frost line. This is the lowest point in the soil, below which there won't be any freezing because of the high R factor of the overlying soil. And by running your pipes down below that frost line, you guarantee they will not freeze during the winter. This winter was so hard, it drove the frost line down below the pipes. They're frozen. They're probably cracked and fractured in a lot of different places as well. Now, Russian scientists are out there saying the same thing I have been telling you for a couple of months now. The planet Earth is entering a period of global cooling because solar output is in decline. How dare you listen to those Russians? They're evil. You should listen to Al Gore. It's amazing. Alrighty, let's see. There's a new whooping cough outbreak in California. Lewis School has sent warning letters to the families that there is whooping cough identified in the school in the 8th grade. Now, of course, to get from the 7th to the 8th grade, you've got to have all of your vaccinations, including whooping cough. We're seeing this as a common feature of all these outbreaks of whooping cough and measles. The people getting the illnesses had the vaccines, and they get sick, and the media wags them to say, oh, see, you have to go and buy more of this stuff. Now, as you heard on the SRN News Break, the no-choice bill in California has stalled at least temporarily. And in the end, somebody has to take a stand and say it is up to the parents and up to the individual what medications are going to be given, especially with the high risk of autism and other ancillary damages from the current batch of vaccines that are being foisted on us. Remember, the U.S. Vaccine Court has acknowledged over 100 deaths from the measles vaccine, but nobody has died of the measles itself in the last 10 years in the United States of America. It's a violation of the Nuremberg principles that all administering of medical treatment be conducted with the consent of the patient. And we're now seeing governments that are standing up and saying, you don't have a right to your own body. We will decide for you what medications you're going to be forced to take and pay for. I think a big part of this is trying to stimulate the U.S. economy by ordering us to buy products we don't want and probably don't need anyway. Let's see. Very sad story from Georgia. The young lady had a miscarriage, and she needed some assistance flushing the remains out of her. So her doctors prescribed her misoprostol, which would allow her body to finish what had started naturally. The doctor phoned the prescription into the local Walmart. The pharmacist on duty refused to fill the prescription because he's a Christian, and he couldn't think of a valid reason she would need this medication, which can be used to induce abortion. The doctor explained to the pharmacist why this girl needed this medication, and the pharmacist said, I don't feel there's a reason. We refuse to fill it. That's pretty absurd. And what makes it absurd is there are apparently laws in that state that allow pharmacists to refuse to fill doctors' prescriptions for purposes their religion doesn't agree with. But in California, you cannot refuse a vaccination because of your religion. I wonder how the government's going to react when all the Christians stand up and start talking about throwing out the money changers. I'll bet you that religious exception is going to go away real quick. NASA is saying California has only 1 year of water left. There's no backup plan. Once again, NASA doesn't know what they're talking about because decades ago, Alaska Governor Wally Hickel suggested an ocean pipeline to carry fresh water from Alaska to California, and now entrepreneurs are seeing an opportunity, and they're going to start building that. They're going to pipe water from southeast Alaska's rainforest to users in California. 9 out of the 11 Ebola treatment centers built by Americans has never seen a single Ebola patient. That's actually a good news, albeit a waste of money, as it were. By the way, I already missed this one. I should have gotten to it before. Okay, there's the music. I'm going to stop here. I had another article, but it needs to be paired with a movie. There's a movie on cable right now called The Imitation Game about Alan Turing. Make a point of seeing it. We're going to be talking about that tomorrow. That's the end of our show. We'll be back tomorrow on the Genesis Communication Network. Please tell all your friends and family about Genesis, about whatreallyhappened.com. We need your support to continue doing what we're doing. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.